Buying a fish finder in 2021 can be very confusing. There are dozens of models that all claim to help you catch more bass. However, I've never seen anyone try to determine exactly how many extra bass you can catch using a fish finder. So today, I'm going to try to answer this question using math, data, and bass fishing theory. By the end, you'll hopefully know exactly which fish finder is right for you. Let's get into it. For most anglers, the reason we buy a fish finder is to catch more bass. More specifically, we buy them to increase the number of bass we catch during a single fishing day. This can be calculated with a simple equation. You take the number of bass caught per area, multiplied by the percent chance to catch a bass, multiplied again by the total number of areas fished per day. All these variables can and will change, resulting in either more or fewer bass caught each fishing trip. Therefore, if we can determine how buying a fish finder impacts these three variables, we can determine how many extra bass it can help you catch. To do this, I needed to dig a little deeper into some of these variables. First was the total number of areas fished. By my reasoning, the total number of areas fished can be calculated using this equation. However, more calculations are needed to get the average time to fish each area. I'm not going to bore you by going through all these calculations in detail. Instead, I put my MBA to good use and put all these equations into an Excel spreadsheet. This allows me to plug in different variables and quickly calculate the total number of bass caught during one fishing day. Now, there are a lot of variables here, so you're probably wondering where I got all these numbers. Well, as a lot of you know, I love offshore fishing, and I also love data. For the past 5 years, I've been collecting data on all of my personal fishing trips. Most of these trips were focused on offshore bass fishing, which is perfect for this analysis because most anglers buy fish finders so they can catch more bass offshore. Therefore, I just use my offshore fishing trips for this analysis. As a quick aside, when I say offshore bass fishing, I mean fishing on a lake in water that is deeper than 5 feet and on a spot that is more than 1 cast length away from the shoreline. I'm not talking about saltwater fishing in the ocean. Back on topic, using the data from my personal fishing trips, I was able to get values for the different input variables and calculate the total number of fish I could expect to catch on a given fishing day. To validate my input variables, I wanted to compare my results to other anglers. To do this, I pulled data from recent Major League Fishing tournaments. For those unfamiliar with Major League Fishing, it's a professional tournament trail where anglers compete to catch as many 2+ pound bass as possible. This is perfect because my personal dataset only captured bass over 2 pounds as well. For this analysis, I captured the number of fish caught by the winner of each tournament round, which is one fishing day. However, I only include rounds when the winning angler was fishing exclusively offshore, on lakes that are similar to my own. This limited the dataset significantly, but I was still able to find 7 data points. From these 7 data points, I found the average number of fish caught was 12.7 bass per day. Now that I had this number, I was able to adjust some of my input variables to match the conditions during these Major League Fishing rounds. I changed total hours fished to 7.5 and the run time between areas to 5 minutes. I initially put 30 minutes because when I go fishing, I have no idea where the fish are. This means I need to spend 30 minutes on average idling over offshore structure with my fish finder to find bass. However, during fishing tournaments, anglers have 2 to 3 days of practice to find bass before the tournament. This means we can eliminate this idle time and only consider the time it takes for them to drive from one spot to another, which I estimated at 5 minutes. Using these new inputs, I was pleasantly surprised to see my calculation lined up almost perfectly with the professional tournament results. This made me confident that my equations are at least directionally accurate, and I can use them to make actionable recommendations for you guys. Now, some of you are probably still wondering how any of this helps me recommend which fish finder you should buy. Let me explain. A lot of the variables in my equation are directly impacted by properly using a fish finder. Let's take casting accuracy as an example. When you're fishing offshore for bass, you're not going to be able to see what's under the water or where you should be casting. Now, there are methods for hitting offshore areas without a fish finder, like triangulation or using a marker buoy. But they're not very accurate and may result in only hitting this offshore rock pile 30% of the time. Now imagine you buy a fish finder with GPS capabilities. You can now idle over the rock pile with side imaging, mark it with a waypoint, and line up your cast using this waypoint. This will increase your casting accuracy to 70%. Then let's say you go one step further and invest in 360 imaging or live imaging. Now you can use forward-facing sonar to see exactly where the rock pile is in front of the boat and increase your casting accuracy to 100%. If we hold all other variables equal and only change casting accuracy, you can see increasing casting accuracy from 30% to 100% results in 1 extra bass caught per day. This is because you spend less time on each area, resulting in more areas fished each day. And casting accuracy is just one of many variables impacted by buying a fish finder. Therefore, by determining how each type of fish finder impacts the variables in my equation, I can calculate how many extra bass you can expect to catch by upgrading your fish finder. Here's a chart with my best estimates on how each type of fish finder impacts the variables I used. I'm not going to go into how I estimated each value, because this video would be over an hour long. Instead, I'm going to share my key findings from this analysis and how they relate to the following 3 groups of offshore anglers. If you spent less than 50 hours graphing offshore with your fish finder, and by graphing I mean actually driving your boat looking at your fish finder screen, and also have less than 1 year of experience fishing offshore, you'll fall in the novice group. If you spent less than 500 hours graphing and have less than 5 years of offshore fishing experience, you'll fall in the proficient group. Finally, if you've spent more than 500 hours graphing and have more than 5 years of offshore experience, you're in the expert group. For this analysis, I adjusted the input variables to align with each group's skill level. Again, these are all estimates based on my personal experience and research, and are by no means perfect. They'll vary from angler to angler, so please don't leave a comment about how I got one of these numbers wrong. I'm fully aware that this is not a perfect analysis, but it's the best I can do with the information I have. Now that I've explained all the moving parts of this analysis, let's jump into my key findings.
Number 1.
Learn side imaging first. To explain, here's a graph of how many bass a novice offshore angler can expect to catch with different types of fish finders. You can see that if a novice offshore angler buys a side imaging combo unit, they will catch roughly 1.5 more bass per day offshore. To be clear, a side imaging combo is any fish finder with side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar, and GPS capabilities. While catching only 1.7 bass in 8 hours may not seem that great, it's important to remember that these numbers are averages, so you need to consider both the days when you catch 5 bass offshore and the days when you get skunked. Also, we're assuming it takes 30 minutes of graphing to find each area you fish. After taking all other variables into account, a novice angler is expected to fish 8 spots per day for 30 minutes apiece. This means you're spending half of your day graphing and half of your day actually fishing. I've talked about this before in other YouTube videos. I found the most efficient way to find and catch offshore bass when you're only fishing for 1 day is to spend at least half of the day behind the steering wheel graphing. I'll leave links in the description to my other videos covering this topic. The important thing to call out for this analysis is that if you graph for, let's say, 1 hour, you're not going to get the most out of your fish finder, and the number of bass you catch offshore will decrease. Therefore, before investing thousands of dollars into a fish finder, ask yourself whether you want to spend half of your fishing day driving your boat. For many anglers, this does not sound fun, so it may be best to save your money and invest in some other technology that will benefit your shallow water fishing, like power poles. For those who are not sure, you can still pick up a pretty decent fish finder for around $500 with side imaging, down imaging, and GPS mapping that will get the job done. This allows you to experiment with the technology first before dropping thousands of dollars. This is probably a good time to mention that this video is not sponsored by any fish finder manufacturer. As a result, I'm not going to focus on any specific brands for this analysis, only the functionality of each unit. This also means I'm not receiving any compensation for this analysis. It took me several weeks to put this all together, so if you find it useful, I would really appreciate if you checked out our website, fishthemoment.com. For those who fell into the proficient group, I would highly recommend signing up for my Advanced Electronics seminar. This seminar is focused on identifying which offshore areas hold catchable bass, even if you can't see any on your fish finder. I also share my secrets for finding big bass consistently with your fish finder and many more advanced topics I've never shared in any of my YouTube videos. For those in the novice group, I would recommend checking out our lake breakdowns. These breakdowns include 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder, along with detailed area descriptions and a lake summary. We have breakdowns on lakes all over the country broken up by season. The waypoints are chosen by professional angler Randy Blockett and will get your fishing journey started in the right direction. Getting back to the results, you may have also noticed that purchasing a standalone unit with either 360 imaging or live imaging will result in fewer fish catches than just using a side imaging combo unit alone. To be clear, 360 imaging is only available on Humminbird fish finders. Live imaging includes Garmin LiveScope, Lowrance Active Target, and the soon-to-be-released Humminbird Mega Live. The reason forward-facing sonar units are not great by themselves is because they're designed to be mounted on your trolling motor and used while fishing. On the other hand, side imaging is designed to be used when driving with your big engine. This allows you to cover a lot more water with side imaging. Let's explain this using math. With a side imaging unit mounted to your console, you can graph effectively at 4 miles an hour and scan 100% of the lake's bottom. However, with a live imaging or 360 imaging unit mounted to your trolling motor, the maximum speed you can move and still get a decent image is 2 miles per hour. Moreover, you're not going to be able to effectively scan the entire bottom of the lake with live imaging, 360 imaging, or live imaging perspective mode. Each type of sonar has limitations when it comes to scanning large amounts of water. LiveScope and Active Target only scans a narrow strip of water in front of your boat, so you would need to constantly sweep the transducer side to side while moving to cover the entire bottom. This is much harder to do than just driving in a straight line with side imaging and letting the unit do all the work. With 360 imaging and LiveScope perspective mode, the image quality drops significantly when you're moving faster than 2 miles an hour. There are also other issues that I don't have time to explain in this video. Due to these limitations, side imaging will allow you to cover 150% more water than with forward-facing sonar. Moreover, you can find fish just as effectively with side imaging if you know how to interpret the sonar. I hear a lot of guys say it's easier to find fish with live imaging. However, this is not true. In my opinion, you can actually identify bass more efficiently by combining both side imaging and down imaging together if you take your time to learn how to use both views on your fish finder. However, it's true that LiveScope is more intuitive and easier to just pick up and use than side and down imaging. This doesn't change the fact, though, that an experienced side and down imaging user will find more fish faster than someone using only LiveScope. And for those who are wondering, it doesn't make sense to mount a 360 imaging or LiveScope transducer off the back of your boat. You will run into the same problems we faced earlier, and the results would not change. Because side imaging allows you to cover more water, it takes less time to find new fishing areas. This increases the number of areas you can fish in a day, increasing the number of bass caught. To drive this point home, let's take a look at a similar chart for proficient anglers. For this group, adding a side imaging fish finder will result in 3 extra fish catches per day. This is because this group has a better understanding of how fish finders work and how to find offshore fish in general. In addition to the sonar functions of a fish finder, detailed contour maps available on fish finders can sometimes be even more valuable than the sonar imaging itself. A solid understanding of how to use a contour map will help you identify where to start graphing with your fish finder, saving you even more time. Finally, we have the expert group. These anglers will catch 5 extra bass per day by adding a side imaging fish finder as a result of their additional skill and experience. Hopefully this demonstrates the importance of learning how to use a side imaging fish finder. Not only is it less expensive than forward-facing sonar, it will also help you catch more fish.
Number 2.
Forward-facing sonar isn't for everyone. To explain, let's use this new graph for novice offshore anglers who have both side imaging and forward-facing sonar on their boat. In this case, you would have a side imaging unit on your console and either live imaging or 360 imaging up by your trolling motor. As you can see from my analysis, adding forward-facing sonar with your side imaging unit does very little to increase the number of bass a novice offshore angler will catch. This result all comes down to efficiency. From my own personal experience teaching novice anglers about live imaging on the water, I find they spend almost twice as much time fishing an area because they see fish on live imaging. This causes them to make double the casts, reducing the number of areas fished per day. Even worse, new anglers are often unable to differentiate which species of fish they're seeing on their live imaging. This means they may spend an hour casting a crappie, catfish, drum, or any other species and never catch a bass. This extra time per area results in fewer fish catches, even though their casting accuracy and the percent chance to catch a bass increases by adding live imaging. I know this result may seem fishy to some of you, no pun intended, especially due to all the hype around live imaging. However, there's more to catching bass than just driving out into the middle of the lake and turning on LiveScope. You need to understand bass behavior, seasonal bass movement, how to utilize a contour map, how current, weather, and lake conditions affect bass, and so much more before you start taking advantage of this awesome technology. If you're a novice angler and are still interested in forward-facing sonar, the results show it's actually better to get 360 imaging because it will increase your casting accuracy significantly without adding the temptation of casting at every trash fish that swims by your boat. The story is similar for proficient offshore anglers, though they are usually a little more adept at differentiating bass from other species on live imaging. This brings 360 imaging and live imaging to a virtual tie in the number of extra fish you can catch. The reason live imaging is still not better than 360 imaging is now that proficient anglers know they're looking at bass on the screen, they'll spend more time fishing for those bass, even if they're completely inactive. They may also not know which bait they need to throw to trigger those fish to bite, or when to give up on a group of fish and return later during a better feeding window. These skills all come from years of offshore fishing experience on the water and can't be bought at the local tackle shop. I have dozens of videos focused on bass behavior on this YouTube channel, and I'll leave links to them below for those who are interested. Finally, we have the expert group. For the first time, we can see live imaging produces more bass than 360 imaging. The reason for this result again lies in efficiency. In general, expert offshore anglers know when a group of bass is catchable and which baits to throw to trigger those fish to bite. They also know when to leave an area when the fish are not biting. This allows them to spend significantly less time on each area, increasing the total number of areas fished, resulting in more fish caught per day. This is why you see live imaging dominating professional fishing tournaments right now. If you put live imaging in the hands of an angler that is already an expert in side imaging and offshore fishing theory, they can usually catch at least 3 extra bass per day, if not more, using live imaging. This leads us nicely into my last takeaway.
Number 3.
Electronics can only take you so far. One thing I've heard a lot lately about forward-facing sonar and electronics in general is that they eliminate the skill of bass fishing. This could not be any further from the truth. In reality, it takes thousands of hours both fishing and graphing offshore to learn the skills necessary to fully utilize these tools. If it were so easy to use live imaging and catch bass, every tournament angler in the country with access to live imaging would be catching 20-pound bags of fish every day. However, this is not the case, and there are plenty of anglers who have live imaging who still can't catch a fish to save their life. In addition, the anglers who are dominating on the professional level with live imaging were already among the top 2 to 3% of offshore bass fishermen in the world before they got live imaging. To put this all into perspective, I made a few graphics of some interesting findings from my analysis. First, an expert offshore angler with side imaging will catch at least 5 more bass per day offshore than a novice offshore angler with the same fish finder. Second, a proficient offshore angler with side imaging will catch 2 more bass per day than a novice offshore angler with both side imaging and live imaging. Third, an expert offshore angler with both side and live imaging will catch 6 more bass per day than a proficient angler with the same setup. Finally, a novice angler with side and live imaging will catch the same number of bass as a novice angler with just side imaging. Now, I want to reiterate that all of these numbers are based on averages and can vary greatly from day to day. However, we can still see that simply adding $15,000 worth of fish finders will not automatically increase the number of bass you catch. To wrap this video up, I want to give my fish finder recommendations for each skill group using the results from my analysis. For novice anglers, I would recommend getting a fish finder with side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar and GPS mapping by your console first and learn how to use it effectively. Again, you can find good units like this for $500, and I'll be making reviews of pretty much every fish finder on the market soon on this channel. If you don't want to miss them, make sure to subscribe to the Fish the Moment YouTube channel. Then in year 2, if you still like offshore fishing and want to take your offshore fishing games to the next level, I would recommend investing in 360 imaging by your trolling motor. For proficient anglers, I would recommend getting side imaging by your console, regardless of where you're fishing. However, if you're fishing lakes with primarily dirty water, I would add 360 imaging by your trolling motor, because you're going to be encountering far fewer suspended bass. However, if you're fishing more regularly on clear water lakes, I would recommend getting LiveScope because you'll encounter more suspended bass, and LiveScope is a great tool for targeting those fish. Finally, if you're an expert offshore angler, you probably don't need my recommendation, but I personally run all 3 types of sonar, and you can check out my entire setup in this video link below. If you're interested in purchasing a fish finder, I would highly recommend checking out thebasstank.com. The Bass Tank is the premier graph installation team in the country, and they can definitely help you get the perfect setup for your needs. You can shop on their website or give them a call for additional help with your purchasing decision. And that's it for this video. This was a long and complicated video, so if you're still here, you're definitely a bass fishing nerd just like me. Leave me a comment down below, letting me know if you made it to the end of the video, and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed. Thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you on the next one.